A few months ago, I was talking to my colleague Rabbi Uri Romano, and he mentioned to me about this passage from the Talmud. We were talking about Pesach and what to talk about and whether we do a class or not. He remembered about this passage from Tractate Moed Katan, and I went and looked it up. I didn't know about this passage. I heard of, but I really wanted to go and read it again. So it's this strange teaching in the Talmud. It's about Pharaoh. It is very humorous and actually very absurd too. The Talmud says that the Pharaoh in the time of Moses was 1 cubit tall, kind of like 18 inches. His beard was 1 cubit long, and his anatomy, his genitals, his virility was a cubit and a span. Now, the rabbis were not trying to write a history here. I think they were really doing something far more dangerous. I think they were doing psychology. And they were telling us that Pharaoh was a man whose accessories were larger than his own essence. This is a man whose image was bigger than his reality, and a man whose story was bigger than his own soul. And the rabbis of the time of the Talmud were not really talking about Pharaoh. They were really talking about us. You see, every human being lives inside a story. Talking about Pesach, retelling the story. There is the story we tell other people. The story also we tell at the dinner party when someone asks, so what do we do? Well, there is the story on our resumes, the story on our social media, the story we tell our parents, the story we tell our children, the story we tell also to our own selves. But the truth is, most of us are not living our lives. Most of us are maintaining a story about our lives. And that story usually has very specific rules. In that story, we are competent. In that story, we are in control. In that story, we are moving forward. In that story, we are successful. In that story, we are always right. And in that story also, we are justified. And in that story, we are also the good ones in the story. This is what we might call, and also Parker calls, the ego story. And the ego story is like Pharaoh's beard. It grows longer and longer and longer, and eventually we spend our whole life maintaining it. And here's the great irony of the Exodus story. Pharaoh was the most powerful man in the world, and yet he was the least free person in the story. Why? Because Pharaoh could not change his mind. He could not admit that he was wrong. He could not say, hey, I made a mistake. He could not say, I don't know. He could not say, I am not God. Why not? Why not? Because Pharaoh was not protecting Egypt. Pharaoh was protecting his story about himself. And once you have an ego story, you become its slave. Because you have to defend it, you have to protect it, you have to maintain it, you have to keep the image alive. And suddenly you are not free anymore. You are not living. You are managing perception. You are not even growing. You are not maintaining proportions. You are not walking forward. You are standing still protecting a statue of yourself. And this is why the Torah calls Egypt Mitzrayim, from the word Matzah, narrowness, tightness, constriction. Because the ego makes your life narrow. Because you cannot change. You cannot admit mistakes. You cannot be vulnerable. You cannot even start again. You cannot allow yourself to be small, and you cannot allow yourself to be wrong. You must remain Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is literally a prison, is to be in jail. But there is another story, and this is underneath the ego story, that there is quieter an amazing story. It's a deeper story. It's a truer story. We might call it the soul story, as Parker also called the ego story and the soul story. And the ego story is the story we tell the world, but the soul story is the story we tell ourselves when we cannot sleep at night. The ego story is about success, but the soul story is about meaning. The ego story removes the painful parts, but the soul story includes everything. It's all-inclusive. The failures, the losses, the mistakes, the detours, the heartbreak, the confusion, the unexpected turns that changed our lives. The ego story is chametz, puffed up with air. And the soul story is Matzah, is flat and simple and honest, and it's real. And Pesach is not only about leaving Egypt. It's not about Yetziat Mitzrayim only. Pesach is about living the ego story. We usually think freedom means expansion, more successful, more recognition, perhaps more money, or perhaps more influence, or more control, or more certainty, more followers, more beard. But the Exodus story, the story of our people, the story from the Torah, teaches something radical. Freedom is not becoming bigger. Freedom is becoming more real. If you're pretending to be someone you're not, you are not free. If you are living for other people's expectations, you are not free. If you cannot admit mistakes, then you're not free. If you cannot change your mind, you're not free. If you cannot say, I don't know, you're not free. Freedom begins the moment you no longer have to protect the ego story. Freedom begins the moment you can say, this is who I am. This is where I failed. This is where I am confused. This is where I'm growing. This is where I'm still learning. That is freedom. So maybe the story of Pesach is not only about Pharaoh in Egypt. Maybe for us today, the story of Pesach is about the Pharaoh inside us. That voice that says, you must look strong. You must look successful. You must not fail. You must not be embarrassed. You must be in control. You must maintain the image. You must win every single argument. You must always be right. And God comes into our lives and says, let my people go. Shlach na et ami. Not the Israelites. Let your soul go. Let go of the image. Let go of the beard. Let go of the story you're trying to maintain. Let go of who you think you're supposed to be. Let go of the Pharaoh you're trying to protect. Leave Egypt. Leave the narrow place. Leave the ego story. And walk into the wilderness where you don't have an image yet. Where you don't have control yet. Where you don't know exactly who you are yet. But yes, you are free. Just breathe into how it feels, because in this Chol HaMoed Pesach, maybe the question is not only did God take us out of Egypt? Maybe the real question is, am I still living like Pharaoh? Am I still protecting an image? Am I still living my ego story? Or perhaps my soul story? Because, my friends, the greatest miracle of Pesach is not that the sea split in two. The greatest miracle of Pesach is that a human being can stop pretending and start living truthfully. To live without a beard, or to live without the spin, or to live without the mask. To live like Matzah, simple, real, honest, and free. And that is Yetziat Mitzrayim. That is leaving Egypt. That is real freedom. Chag Sameach, Moadim L'Simcha, V'Shabbat Shalom.